Legend. Today I am going to be delivering some Christmas Carol key quotes. I've been putting off this video for quite a while because sometimes I haven't really found the time to do it, but here we are right now. And the reason why I posted this video is for the upcoming AQA English Literature exam coming for Monday 11th of May, and I didn't want people to only be prepared for Macbeth and be left unprepared for Christmas Carol for paper 1. So here we are. Now I may not have covered all the text, but I'm just covering the ones that I study because I know them best, and it wouldn't be very sensible for me to make a video on something like Romeo and Juliet, something that I haven't really studied, like Jekyll and Hyde. So now let's start off with the key quotes. Now, number one key quote. But Scrooge, he was a tight-fisted hand at the grindstone, a squeezing, wrenching, grasping, scraping, clutching, covetous old sinner. Now, you could argue that Dickens uses this imagery of Scrooge being a tight-fisted hand at the grindstone to suggest that he is so concentrated on his pursuit of wealth that he's almost melded to his work. As in, he's just concentrated so much on that soul aspect that him being melded to it almost suggests that he is intertwined with it or married with it, and that it is now a part of his daily life. And then you could also argue that the indented list of adjectives are used to exemplify the malignant character of Scrooge and how selfish he is, or how he is ruined by his selfishness at the exposition of the novel. And all those plosives and guttural sounds add a jarring tone, and that essentially means that it reflects Scrooge's character, and therefore means that he is initially presented to the audience as unappealing. So you could use this quote to refer to the fact that Dickens has presented him in this way to act as a contrast for the end of the novella. And no, I can't do a backflip, sorry. Now for quote number 2. Quote number 2 is going to be, are there no prisons? Are there no workhouses? So you could use this quote so essentially it's kind of repeated twice in the novel, but I think you should use both of them, since are there no prisons, are there no workhouses, as he says to the charity workers, and then as the ghost of Christmas Present turns on him on the last time. And Dickens may be using last time to highlight the fact that Scrooge's prior ways are not beneficial to society and are rather ill thought. And in the Victorian era, there were two contemporary ways of how the poor were presented, as the idle poor or the deserving poor. So the idle poor were just the poor who were perceived to be poor because they didn't work. And then there was the deserving poor, who ended up poor because they couldn't control the stimuli or the environment around them. So you could use this quote to argue that Dickens tries to remove any sense of dogma of the poor by suggesting that society's current ways of portraying the poor have only led to more of their suffering over time, and that society should actually support the poor rather than end up just abandoning them and just slandering them, essentially. The process there also marks Scrooge's sense of severity, or sense of pride in a way, because this essentially means you could argue that although some people may not think this, it could also suggest that he thinks that the poor are just an asset in society, just a mere possession rather than people who we need to take care of in order to ensure that society thrives rather than just dies. And the rhetorical question could also pose a question to the audience to allow Dickens to convey the fact that society should question their actions or question their thoughts about the less fortunate, and they should actually take time to think and present proper action. Now, quote number 3. So quote number 3 is, what if he be like to die? He had better do it and decrease the surplus population. Now, this quote is full of plosives, the D's, the T's, the P's, and that suggests this absolute severity of Scrooge's fault, and emphasise the brutality presented to the poor. Because Dickens uses Scrooge as a social construct, this means that he is using Scrooge to represent society, who then thinks that the poor is just surplus and just an unnecessary part of society. And this question the question that what if he be like to die, that the Ghost of Christmas Present uses, is a question to society that Dickens uses to ensure that society questions whether they should be saying these views or not. In addition, another reference may be that Dickens may be referring to Malthusian views of that contemporary time. So, for example, Thomas Malthus was a pessimist British economist of that contemporary period, who thought the poor were a surplus population and were preventing society from thriving. So Dickens may be using this to challenge society's views, and to challenge society's views of thinking that the poor are merely a surplus because they are still a part of society, and they therefore should be considered alongside all the other people and should not be undervalued. Now, here is the next quote. The next key quote that you should absolutely remember is going to be, This girl is ignorant. This girl is ignorant. This girl is ignorant. This boy is want. But most of all, beware this boy, for on his brow, I see that which is written doom. Dickens may have been using this to show how the devastation of the poor and how they are currently being ignored by society. So the girl being ignorant may have been a construct used by Dickens to symbolize the ignorance of society towards the poor and only meeting their pursuit of wealth that Scrooge has, because he is also presented as a construct for contemporary Victorian society. Then, the boy being want symbolizes the fact that the poor are almost destitute and are in need of education, education or education or need to actually thrive in society, whereas the richer populace usually overlook them and do not pay enough attention to them. Now, before that, Dickens uses an asyndetic list of verbs which are ragged, scowling, wolfish, yellow, which introduces a sense of pathos to Dickens' audience because it makes them realize the call to action that they need to take to make society better and to prevent the poor from suffering in order to prevent society from experiencing a downfall or a sort of catastrophe. And Dickens may also have been using doom for the boy who is want, to symbolize that if the poor's wants are not met, then society will end up experiencing the societal doom that Dickens is foreshadowing. Which means that the audience have to realize that they have to actively care and aid the poor, rather than just ignore them and isolate them from society. Which is why it's important for the audience to not become ignorant, so that way they do not cause societal doom. Now, my final quote, my fifth quote, is going to be, "Mankind was my business, the dealings of my trade, but a comprehensive drop in the ocean of my business." At first, this quote does not seem very important, or it only holds some importance. But I can tell you, that if you use this quote properly, then you will be actually able to use it as a level 6 quote. And I know this because I used this quote and it got marked and it was level 6. So let me just describe it into the way I described it. So, mankind being business is using business terminology to almost suggest that everyone's dealings should be of mankind and mankind first, rather than just focusing on the pursuit of wealth that Scrooge initially has. In addition, Shakespeare likens mankind as an ocean, using ocean imagery, almost using it as a metaphor. So, since oceans are massive, that means that they need to be taken care of seriously, because oceans need to be taken care of for species and fish and multiple life to thrive. So, Dickens likens it to an ocean to demonstrate that society should take care of all of mankind. They should prioritize it in order to make society thrive, rather than bear the consequences of being partial to other people and ignoring some of the poorer populace. In addition, you could also argue that the pursuit of wealth is insignificant compared to prioritizing mankind, since Marley's Ghost likens likens the dealings of his trade, which was to pursue wealth and pursue money rather than actually look after society to create a positive impact on it. It suggests that the pursuit of wealth is unimportant and that the whole of society should be taken care of first in order to make communities and whole areas more more stable, more compassionate, and more charitable to society. So Dickens uses this, may have used this quote towards audiences to demonstrate the fact that society should always be taken care of and not be neglected, so as not to fall into a sense of doom or chaos because some other people are neglected. So regardless of everyone's demographic in society, society should never be neglected and they should always be taken care of. In addition, Dickens may be using this to suggest that mankind is more important than pursuit of wealth. So having a positive social impact is better than having a positive economic impact, since it demonstrates a sense of selflessness rather than selfishness, since it actually creates long-term gain for communities and other people around you rather than basically just yourself and your other business partners. So those are the 5 quotes that I would use for Christmas Carol. They are not going to be the only quotes you should use. They are not the be-all, they are not the end-all. There are definitely loads of other quotes. Those are 5 really important quotes, and you're going to use at least one of them in your essay. And in fact, if you are intelligent enough and really are desperate for that level 5, level 6, not really desperate, if you really desire, if you work hard for it, then you can actually use those quotes to link back to how Dickens wants society to be more charitable and more compassionate towards the poor, and how society should not ignore the less fortunate so as to not end up paying the ultimate price for it, as in a critique of the way society is looking after the poor, and that they should be more aware of what the poor's hardships and suffering is like. It's not a definitive list, but you can see an idea of how to use those quotes, and I suggest that you note them down if you're watching this video so as to get the maximum amount of success from these quotes, and you should apply them. It is not too late to start revising. It's not too late. You just really have to focus. You really have to push yourself. Just continue ensuring that you have the right quotes that work for you. Just continue that you're revising those Christmas Carol quotes, and it will definitely work out come exam day. So I hope you have really enjoyed this video, and if so, please consider giving a like, subscribe, and comment if so. And remember, be bright, stay right, and I hope you have a good day.